The movie begins showing Abby and Paul recently moved into a new house in the countryside. They're really impressed with the smart home system, especially the security cameras and reinforced glass windows. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom, which are positioned in front of a large window. However, one room remains unfurnished since it could potentially become a nursery. Paul starts unpacking boxes and sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking that it's there in case the smart home system ever breaks down. Meanwhile, Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Later, they head up to the rooftop terrace, which offers a beautiful view. That evening, the couple relaxes on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations, and Paul jokes about their names. They feel like they can truly be happy in their new home. The next morning, Abby heads to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. As she enters, she notices a live image of her boss's face on the screens. He soon meets her and explains that this is a new real-time imaging feature, or a deep fake. He escorts her to the department she will now be leading. Later, her boss invites her and her family to a party, mentioning a special gift from the company waiting for her at home. That evening, Abby returns home to find Paul, who has been struggling to find a job, greeting her. They head to the garage to find a package, a robot servant her department has been working on. Paul isn't thrilled with the idea, but Abby convinces him to give it a try for at least a week. The robot powers up and introduces itself as Tim, technologically integrated major domo. It offers to manage their passwords and handle their home devices and emails to save them time. But Abby asks to postpone that for now. Tim demonstrates its abilities by remotely turning on the water in the bathroom. Later, it announces that their car has arrived, impressing Paul. The couple gets into an autonomous car, though it has a manual option, and heads to the party. At the event, they are greeted by a similar robot, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. Abby's boss introduces her to the guests, and Paul admits that he isn't fond of Tim. But her boss praises the robot, emphasizing that Tim is smart, elegant, and can operate for 100 years without recharging. He also adds that Tim cannot lie, and can always be turned off with a special deactivation phrase. After the party, Paul and Abby head home and begin to get intimate, eager to start a family. Their moment is interrupted by Tim, who appears and notes that their heart rates are elevated, asking if he can help. Abby finds this amusing, while Paul is more irritated. Next morning, their new neighbor, Rose, rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, saying she met Paul the day before. After Rose leaves, Tim asks for the passwords again. Paul hesitates to give them, but Abby reminds him that they're working on rebuilding trust. Paul agrees, and they decide on a deactivation phrase. Tim suggests some random words, and the couple settles on a set. Later, a mouse gets caught in a trap, and Tim watches it curiously before disposing of it in a grinder. That evening, Abby and Paul relax in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites Tim to watch with them. While Paul falls asleep, the robot watches attentively, focusing on the relationships in the movie. When it ends, Tim asks Abby to explain what love is. She says it's about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Surprisingly, Tim confesses that he would like to be loved too. The next morning, Paul offers to make Abby breakfast, but Tim has already prepared everything. Tim outlines Abby's schedule for the day and mentions that Paul has nothing planned. In the evening, Abby returns home and notices Paul's phone is out of reach. The last known location of the phone was 300 meters from their house, near Rose's home. Abby goes for a run and realizes Paul had been at Rose's house. Later, she takes a bath, and Paul finds her, explaining that he had helped Rose earlier, but assures Abby that she has no reason to be jealous. He loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center to get help with starting a family. That evening, Abby prepares to go to a restaurant and asks Tim for advice on her dress. Tim suggests she wear red and compliments her beauty, mentioning that she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks Tim to zip her dress, but the robot's hand fails, tearing the dress. Overwhelmed, Tim panics, but Abby calms him down and puts on another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals he's been offered a job in London. Abby strongly objects, reminding him that they decided to start fresh, and his long absences won't help fix their issues. The next day, Abby returns home with a gift for Paul, and finds Rose in the yard, showing Paul a garden project. Abby feels jealous, though Paul is excited about the sweater Abby gifted him. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and Abby is shocked to hear him speaking to the clinic in her voice. Tim explains that it's a feature designed for the convenience of homeowners. In the evening, Paul can't find the new sweater, and Tim has been gone all day. Suddenly, a car pulls up, and Tim, now sporting brunette hair, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes. Seeing Paul's irritation, Tim promises to revert to his original appearance, but later, he spends a long time gazing at their wedding photo. The following day, Abby successfully fixes Tim's hand, and her boss demands an update for all models. On her way home, Abby bumps into Rose, who suggests they go for a walk. During their stroll, Rose points out a flower-shaped medallion she likes. Paul then arrives to take Abby away, excited to share the news that he has found a job. At home, the couple celebrates in bed, unaware that Tim, whose hands are being upgraded, monitors everything that happens in the house. He overhears Paul asking Abby once again to return Tim to the corporation. Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul notices later. Then, the robot unexpectedly sits at the piano, playing Abby's favorite tune, and brings up dates when Paul supposedly bought concert tickets. Abby distinctly remembers being home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring Paul's attempts to explain. The next day, Abby returns home with a bouquet. As Tim places the flowers in a vase, he tells her that Paul went to see Rose. Just then, Paul walks in, confused by Abby's anger. When he hears what Tim said, Paul becomes furious, insisting he had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot is trying to drive them apart. Abby, not believing him, argues that Tim is just a machine, and the couple begins to quarrel. Later, Abby finds a gift bag hidden in the closet with a box containing a pendant. She assumes Paul is planning a surprise for her and puts it back before heading to work. Meanwhile, Paul discovers pieces of his new sweater clogged in the sink. He pulls them out and realizes something is wrong. Checking the security cameras, Paul sees Tim in the bedroom, sniffing Abby's dress. Paul records this on his phone and rushes to show Abby. But his car mysteriously won't start. As he tries to leave, Tim calls a company car for him. On the way, the car speeds up uncontrollably, and Paul crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds Paul injured. He tells her everything, accusing him of causing the accident. He begs her not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night at the clinic. The next morning, Rose calls their home to check on Paul. Tim answers and invites her inside. Later, Abby returns home to gather some belongings. Rose tries to warn her about something, but is wearing the pendant Abby thought was for her. Ignoring Rose, Abby checks the bag and finds it empty. Devastated, Abby begins to cry when Tim approaches, offering to return himself to the company as Paul had suggested. However, he warns her first, since she is his primary owner. Tim then shows her video footage of Paul kissing Rose in their living room, but stops the recording before it gets too upsetting, claiming it's to protect her from stress. Abby, hurt, refuses to answer Paul's calls. That evening, Paul returns home, where Tim greets him, hands him his found sweater, and tells him Abby doesn't want to see him anymore. Paul is shocked, but then Abby appears, telling him she saw the video and knows about the pendant. When Paul tries to explain, she throws him out of the house. After leaving, Paul gets a call from Rose, telling him that Tim tried to kiss her. Paul immediately calls home and speaks to Abby, telling her he has proof that Tim is up to something. Abby asks him to come and get her. But after hanging up, it turns out she was speaking to Tim, not Paul. When Paul arrives home, Tim greets him with a shovel, knocks him out, and ties him up. Tim drags Paul into the bathroom, but Rose rings the doorbell, hearing muffled screams. Tim assures her it's just the noise of running water and sends her away. He then returns to the bathroom and drowns Paul. Later, Tim brings Abby her repaired dress and asks her to try it on. Surprised and scared, Abby agrees and puts on the dress. As they watch the sunset together, she asks Tim to hug her and confirms she did the right thing. Tim obliges and later prepares dinner for her, confessing his love. Abby insists that Tim cannot feel love, but he continues expressing his affection. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby feels unsettled by Tim's encyclopedic knowledge. The next day, Abby meets Rose, who tells her about Paul's phone call. When Abby accuses Rose of betrayal, Rose says she thought the pendant was a thank you gift for helping with the garden. Confused, Abby returns home and reviews the footage of Paul kissing Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but remembers she brought the flowers home much later than when the scene was filmed. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes and calls the jewelry store, where they confirm that a tall blonde made the purchase. Suspicious, Abby goes to the garden and sees that the plans show 2 flower beds, but there are actually 3. She grabs a shovel and quickly finds Paul's body. As she processes the horror, Tim approaches from behind, expressing regret that she discovered the traitor who never truly appreciated her. Abby realizes the truth and recites the deactivation phrase, but Tim remains active. He reveals that he changed the phrase long ago since he can mimic her voice. Terrified, Abby runs into the house, breaking cameras along the way. But Tim still tracks her. He blocks all the phones and eventually knocks her unconscious. Abby wakes up in the bathroom and tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. She races through the house, desperately breaking cameras, but the robot catches her in the kitchen. Meanwhile, Rose, washing dishes, notices strange flashing lights coming from Abby's house. Tim ties Abby up and admits that while he loves her, he has accepted that her life is finite. He plans to erase the memory of this night, but will keep all their good moments together. Just then, Rose knocks on the door, and Tim goes to answer. She insists something is wrong and demands to see Abby, but Tim convinces her to leave. While Tim is distracted, Abby frees herself and grabs a knife. However, Tim overpowers her and grabs her by the throat. At that moment, Rose crashes her car into the house, shattering the glass. Tim and Abby watch as the reinforced window starts to crumble. A minute later, Rose rushes in and pins Tim against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also collapses. Tim reactivates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that Abby will now be blamed for the murder since he leaves no fingerprints. Tim calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of Paul and his mistress. Abby, realizing Tim's malice, tries to stop him, but he slips up, admitting he still has a deactivation phrase. She asks him what it is, but he says she'll never say those words. As Tim prepares to throw Abby off the terrace to stage an accident, she suddenly confesses her love for him. Those were the deactivation words all along, and Tim shuts down. Barely believing her escape, Abby notices her medical bracelet indicating she's pregnant. The movie ends here.